Hi guys, Soulmaster here. Today I'm going to go over the latest release of the RPGWizard 1.60. I'm going to talk about the new features that I've added, what I've improved, and any of the fixes. So we have kind of a slightly longer list than the previous release, which was 1.50, the last major release, which was back in February. I've added quite a lot of new stuff. There is now you have the ability to generate what would be like a board link, which is kind of like an event in the editor without having to code anything. So this is like a send to board. I'll be showing that off. I've also added the ability to dynamically add and remove layer images as was requested by one user. There is a new Sprite Sheet dialog selection for animations. This just makes creating animations for your characters and sprites a lot easier. And there's a new vector tool as well for drawing rectangles. This is an alternative to the freehand tool. It makes it much easier to cover larger areas. So if you were used to selecting what areas would be collisions or activations, this tool is going to be much better than the freehand tool for you. There's also like a splash screen on startup, which we'll briefly see when I start up the wizard. There's a lot of other improvements as well, such as the auto opening of the last project. We'll see that when we open the wizard, it will auto open the wizard's tower project. Basically what that will do is every time you open a project, it will save that last open project, and as long as you haven't moved the project since then, it will be able to open it again. If you have moved it, then it will just open a blank editor and you'll have to go find the project again. There's a lot of other improvements in RPG code for the FireRaycast. Someone asked for this, being able to set the layer that the raycast is originating from, I think. You can create board sprites without any collision or activation vectors, so maybe you just want it to activate like an arrow shooting through the air. You only want it to be triggering activations. You don't want it to be able to push something along with it. So you can just tell it to ignore collisions, but still trigger an activation if it hits a character or something like that. There's some small UX improvements in the layout of some of the panels. I also introduced a special asset cache in the engine, which significantly improves the board loading times. And there's a few other fixes here, which I'll get to a little bit later. So I'm just going to start up the latest version of the RPGWizard. So the first thing we're going to see is a splash screen. There it is. It's a real nice clean splash screen that just stays there as long as it needs to and no longer. And immediately you'll notice that there is a project here in the projects panel. In the older versions of the RPGWizard, you would have had to go open project every single time. Now you can just open the project once. It stores that inside of a preferences.properties file. So if I just pop this open, you will see hasn't yet saved it, but if I close the editor now, it's going to ask me to reload this file, I think. I'll just have to manually reload it by the looks of it. And yeah, so you can see here that it's saved the path to the Wizard's Tower project game file. So if I open that again, here it is. Okay, so the first time you open the editor, it just defaults to the Wizard's Tower. Okay, so let's go over some of the features that I've added. So the first one is probably the event that I've added for Centerboard. So basically what that is, if I go to one of these boards here, like outside board, it's a new board I've added to the demo project. And I'm just going to click on the player layer here, which is where I have the trigger. If I right click on this vector, and I go to the properties, you can see that there's where the event program was, there used to be a little drop down for selecting the programs. There's now this configure button, and it's currently set to a board link. So you can set it to a custom program still, so you can set it to something like Battle System or something like that. Basically, you can go in here and you can say I want to generate a board link program, and you can select the board that you want to send the player to. You just have to know the exact X and Y location plus the layer that you want to send the character to. So there's no real verification on the input here, so you just have to make sure that the X, Y, and the layer actually exist on the board that you're going to send the player to. And when you click OK, what that would do is, I'm not going to do it here, but the moment you click OK, it will go and auto-generate that event in the background for you. But if you just want to look at the event, you just need to click cancel afterwards. If you don't want to make any changes, you click cancel and the event just stays there. So I can see that when I clicked configure again and opened the dialog up, that the old properties are still here. So basically what that allows you to do is just create send to board programs. You can actually see the auto-generated program if you want. If you go into programs, you'll see this auto-generated folder. And under here you will see a little program. Basically what it does is it generates a send to board for you. This is auto-generated. You shouldn't modify this yourself. If you do any modifications in this file, it's going to be lost when the editor overwrites it again. You're welcome to copy the contents of this file and put it somewhere else, and then you can make customizations to it if you want. But you shouldn't modify any of the auto-generated programs in that directory, in that folder. So that's like the first feature. That really cuts down on the amount of code that you have to write for the send to boards. Okay, so the next feature that I have is the ability to dynamically add or remove layer images. So I'm actually just going to open up a program editor now. If you go new program and you start typing RPG code, the first command that will come up is add layer image. And so basically what this does is adds the layer image to the requested layer. It will be rendered immediately after being added to the board. Note layers added this way will be lost the moment the board is reloaded. So this only lasts for as long as the player is on the board. If they get sent to another board, then come back to this board, you'll have to reapply the layer images if you want to see them again. But it's a pretty simple command to use. I'm just going to copy the code example. There's a code example a little bit further down. Basically, you just need an image. You'll need to load this into the engine beforehand with the RPG code load assets command, and then you can specify the X location of pixels on the board, the Y location of pixels on the board where you want the image to appear, and then you need to tag it with an ID. So this will be used later on when you want to remove it. But I'm just going to modify this slightly because I need to pick a image that exists in this project. So I'm just going to look for a suitable image. I'm just going to go with one of the orb images. I'm just going to go with the Cure Orb PNG. It's Cure. I'll just go Orb PNG, and I'm just going to call this my image. Okay, I'm just going to copy this code for now. I'm going to start the engine. I'm not going to save this program. I don't need to. Basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start up the engine. I'm going to press F12, which is going to open up a console window, and I'll be able to type in the command here directly, and I'll be able to show you that complete. But if I just go up to here now, and I execute the same code that I did before, but I just changed the image to one that's already loaded up into the engine, you can see that the image gets placed here as a board layer image. So I can actually go underneath this. It's a layer below me, or it's on the exact same layer as me, but it will be drawn below me. So if I put it on a higher layer and I just move it, this is my image 2, and then you see now I've got dynamic layer images that exist on this layer. And you can go ahead and you can remove them. So if you just go RPG code, now the remove command, you need to know the ID and the layer. So you need to go RPG code dot remove layer image ID. So my image, I know this one exists on layer 1. So if I just run that inside the engine now, I'll see the one on the left here just disappear. Okay, so that's how you remove them. You need to know the ID and the layer that you placed them on. And if I just go... Okay, so that's basically the layer image feature that was added. There was also a new Sprite Sheet dialog for animations. So this is a new feature that I've added that will make creating animations for your characters a lot easier. It also makes it possible for you to work with Sprite Sheets. in the animation editor, which is much better. So I'm just going to open up one of the hero's animations just to show this. I'm just going to open up his walk north animation. So this is the Wizard Tower. It doesn't have any animation sheets with a lot of images, so you get the idea here is when you click on this image, previously you would have just went straight to an image, but now you have this ability to open the image and actually select what sprites within that image you want to use. So if this was a much bigger image, you'd be able to say maybe select only a few of the sprites from it, and so on. You still need to specify what the width and height of each tile is within the sprite sheet that you want to use, but otherwise you can just now select a part of a sprite sheet and use that as an animation. So that makes things a lot smoother and a lot quicker for making a lot of animations from a single sprite sheet. So rather than having to cut up the sprite sheet, you can just use that. Another feature that I've added is a new vector tool on the board editor. Now I added this because I was doing a lot of collision drawing for the last Swordmaster, and rather than having to draw everything freehand, so if you go up here to the tools, there is a draw freehand vector up here. Now this is the older vector tool, and this is just drawing lines. So if you wanted to cover a very big area, you had to draw all 3 points, or all the 4 lines to cover that area. This is useful for more freehand work, but normally you just want to cover a bigger area quickly, so you can just use the other tool up here, which is right next to it. It's called the Draw Area Vector tool, and that just covers an entire area for you. So you can snap that to grid as well, and you can cover precisely the precise tiles, or you can kind of draw it in a more freehand way, and it's a rectangle. So this is really good for doing a lot of collision points or big activation points fast compared to the freehand tool. Okay, so we've seen the splash screen, so that kind of covers all the things under the new section. So we've seen the auto editing of projects. If we just quickly go over the FireRaycast change, so if you go to the program editor and you type rpgcode.fireraycast, you will see that in the origin parameter to this call, it must contain the properties X, Y, and optionally the layer. So you can choose to say that this raycast only affects things on a particular layer. Previously it would have picked up everything, doesn't matter what layer it is, so the arrow would hit something maybe that was like 2 layers lower or something like that, but now you could say that this layer, this raycast only exists on a certain layer, and that's what that change was made for. You should be able to create board sprites without collision and or activation vectors. Okay, so the solution to this was to actually create a option where you could toggle on and off. So I've just opened the second room in the Wizard's Tower demo, which has a enemy sprite on the board. So if I right click on that and I go to properties, and if I go to, wait, it's not here actually, it's not under here, so you actually have to open up the sprite file itself. So I open up this enemy here, so if I go to the evil eye enemy, which is what this board sprite represents, and I click on this, you'll notice in the properties panel there are now these options to toggle on and off the vectors. So the base vector is the collision vector, so you can turn off collisions for this enemy altogether, for example, which would allow it to go through walls and stuff like that. So that might make most sense for like a ghost or something like that. Or you can disable their activations, so maybe you just want a rock or something that can push the player but doesn't trigger any activation. You can just completely disable the activations as well. That's another thing that was added. Okay, so that's useful for cases like an arrow or something where you want the arrow to activate but not necessarily push any other NPCs around. Okay, so there were some minor improvements to the panels. here. I won't talk about them too much, but I kind of cleaned them up a bit. There was a general performance improvement. You might notice not only games, there's now a cache. Basically, when it downloads the asset or loads it up for the first time, it will cache the asset for later use. So if you access a board, it will cache the board, it will cache the NPC, and this just means every time that it switches or it needs to reload it, rather than completely reloading it, just goes straight to the cache, which is a lot quicker. A couple of other things is there was a fix. So previously, if you created like a new file and you typed in it, say this program is unsaved. Previously, if you accidentally closed the editor and you hit the cancel button, the entire editor would close and you'd lose all your work. So that was a bug. That's fixed now. So no matter how many times you click cancel, try to close the editor, as long as you click cancel, you won't lose your work. If you decide to click no, then it will go on to the next file, and if that needs saving, it will ask you again. But if you click no, that means you don't want to save the changes. If you click yes, that means you want to save the changes. But if you just want to stop the editor from closing, just click cancel, and that will just cancel the close altogether. Okay, so there was an issue with setting dimensions in the animation editor that exceeded image sizes, leading to a breakage. That's been fixed. And there was another smaller issue with custom brushes and the new undo redo feature that was added in the last release. That was also fixed. So that kind of covers all of the new features in the latest version of the RPGWizard. So in terms of what's going to be coming next, I'm planning on expanding the events that you can configure. For the minute, it's only you can either set it to a custom program, or you can set it to a board link, and you can configure the board link. I want to expand this to basic dialogues, for example, so you could type text and things like that, and maybe triggering like battle systems, giving a character an item, things like that. Anything that will make creating a simple game quicker for new users, and also be a benefit to people that don't want to have to like code a send to board or something like that. You can just go in here, generate the link, and just let the editor generate the code for you in the background. So that's really where I'm going to be going with the next version of the RPGWizard. I'm going to be looking at making certain things a lot easier, a lot faster to create. And I'm also going to be looking at any other improvements that I can make to the whole user experience, and also the editor in terms of performance and things like that. Most of the bigger features like Android support and things like that will probably be not until next year at this point. I'm going to push those a bit further down the line in favor of just improving the editor overall rather than adding more big features. So that covers RPGWizard 1.60.